Welcome back everyone to Ben's Crab Reviews. Today we'll be cracking open some shells and getting to the bottom of something. We'll be discussing what happens if a president refuses to step down from power, accept the election results, or commit to a peaceful transfer of power. Obviously the context of this is pretty obvious, but if you're out of the loop, here's a quick video to get you in the loop.
With new polls showing President Trump trailing Biden in several swing states, he again suggested he might not accept the outcome of the election.
We want to make sure the election is honest, and I'm not sure that it can be. I don't know that it can be.
Even though Vice President Mike Pence insisted in Wisconsin they would, on one condition.
We will accept free and fair election results.
A day earlier, the president would not commit to a peaceful transfer of power.
Well, we're going to have to see what happens. You know that.
President Trump, you are not a dictator.
On Thursday, Democrats and several Republican leaders put the president on notice.
Look, we've had an orderly transfer of power every 4 years since Washington was selected for a second term in 1792. That will happen again to the winner of the November 3rd election.
The president, who was loudly booed at the Supreme Court as he paid his respects to the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, continues to claim mail-in ballots lead to widespread fraud. But his own FBI director testified on Capitol Hill, saying that's simply not true.
We have not seen, historically, any kind of coordinated national voter fraud effort in a major election.
There are very few things more fundamental to democracy than the peaceful transfer of power. It's the thing that separates democracies from dictatorships, so when presidents refuse to clearly and unambiguously commit to it, that's kind of a big deal. Trump refusing to accept election results is nothing new. He said it numerous times over the years, including in 2016 at the third presidential debate in Las Vegas against his then opponent Hillary Clinton. When asked if he would accept the results of the upcoming election, Trump said, "I will look at it at the time and I will keep you in suspense." At the time, the media called it a remarkable statement that seemed to cast doubt on American democracy. But no one took it that seriously. No one took it as seriously as they should. And perhaps that's justified. Who thought that the obviously fake billionaire reality TV star grifter would ever become president? October 2016 was 30 pounds, 40 gray hairs, and a lifetime ago, and the difference between a presidential candidate musing about refusing the peaceful transfer of power and a president doing the same thing 40 years ago is a very big deal to everyone, except for long-term Richard Nixon advisor and former Trump advisor Roger Stone. Stone recently told Trump to declare martial law if he loses, to jail the Clintons and Zuckerberg if he loses. You may remember Roger Stone from July of this year when Donald Trump commuted his prison sentence. Attorney General Barr reviewed Trump's recommendation and determined Trump was right. The sentence was excessive, saying, "Who among us hasn't accidentally scared a witness out of testifying?" Stone was previously facing a recommended sentence of 9 years, was convicted on charges of obstruction, lying to Congress, witness tampering, or as Trump will call it, a workday. Since then, around 2,000 former DOJ employees have called for Barr's resignation, which in any other time would be the worst day of someone's life. But in this administration, it's just a Tuesday on Twitter. But let's get back on task. What happens if Trump really does refuse to accept the election results and give up power? The common answer is that the military will remove him on July 20th at 12 p.m. And sure, that's a feel-good answer. An answer I think a lot of people feel they needed to hear. And an answer that feels a bit too feel good to be true. But I can assure you that it's true. If Trump just says the election was rigged and does nothing else, he'll be escorted out of the White House. That part is correct. President Trump not conceding and being a crybaby is expected. It is tempting to liken the vote count to the score at a baseball game. The other team can complain, break their bats, or refuse to shake hands after the game, but once the umpire calls the last out, it's over. The flaw of this metaphor is that there is no singular umpire. There are 50 umpires for 50 bases. No singular umpire can decide the game is over. Trump can say he's not accepting the results until his COVID drugs wear off, but his words don't matter. What matters is if Trump takes steps to maintain power despite losing the election. So perhaps the question we should be asking is, let's say Trump tries to keep power after the election instead of being his typical whiny self that is all bark and no bite. The worst case scenario is not that Trump rejects the election outcome. He'll do that anyways. The worst case is that he uses his power to prevent a decisive outcome against him. How could he do that? Well, Trump could block and obstruct a legal, unambiguous victory for Biden during the Electoral College vote. This would prevent a nationwide consensus as to who actually won the election, and then use that to maintain power through the courts. I just said a lot there, so I'll ask the question that everyone, including myself, is wondering. What does that even mean? Trump's legal and campaign team are already creating a framework and a plan to undermine the election after it's happened. One way they are planning to undermine the election is disputing mail-in ballots. Mail-in ballots have plenty of flaws for the Trump ghouls to seize on. Voting by mail is more complicated than voting in person, and technical errors are commonplace at each step. For instance, if voters supply a new address or they write a different version of their name, like, by shortening Benjamin to Ben, or if their signature has changed over the years, or if they print their name on the signature line, or if they fail to seal the ballot inside the inner security envelope, their votes may not be counted, and the Trump campaign plans to contest these ballots. Now, this isn't a far-fetched concept that they say they are planning to do. The Trump campaign and the Pennsylvania Republican Party did a dry run of this during the primary this year. Lawyers for the parties took diligent notes while Philadelphia counted the primary ballots, the majority of which were cast due to the pandemic. The Republican Party's lawyers and the Trump campaign's lawyers identified ballots where there were missing signatures, partial signatures, signatures placed in the wrong spot, ballots where voters wrote their names on the inner security envelope. These envelopes are supposed to be anonymous, but does someone writing their name on the security envelope actually matter? No. These also identified ballots without security envelopes, ballot envelopes without a postmark, ballots with a postmark that wasn't complete, and ballots where voters wrote their birthday instead of the signature date or wrote down the wrong date. Are any of these things that they identified on ballots actual issues? No. If someone writes the wrong date or writes their name in the wrong spot or writes Ben instead of Benjamin, in a sane country, this wouldn't call into question their votes considering their intent is pretty clear, but since we live in 2020 America, this is our reality. The Pennsylvania Republican Party says that they'll have someone connected with the party review each application, each mail ballot envelope in November. Voiding votes is undemocratic and a pretty clear attempt at rigging an election in your favor. There are 35 days between Election Day and when the Electoral College votes. This is when the fight over mail-in ballots will take place. While that fight is going on, the Trump campaign has another plan up their sleeve if they choose to dispute the election. Traditionally, a candidate will win the popular vote in a state, and that candidate then gets all the state's electoral votes. That's how this Electoral College system has worked since the late 1700s. However, that process of voting based on the popular vote in your state isn't enshrined anywhere. There is nothing that says that has to happen. Typically, the electors are chosen based on the popular vote. For instance, if frogs had pockets and Trump won California, I wouldn't be chosen as an elector because I didn't support him. But states have the authority to appoint their own electors however they would like. The Trump campaign and the Republican Party plans on challenging this process. In spite of Joe Biden winning Pennsylvania, the state legislature could appoint electors who would vote for Trump over Biden in spite of the actual vote count. And lucky for all of us, the major swing states of Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, Michigan, and Ohio all have Republican legislatures. However, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Michigan have Democratic governors who, in theory, could veto any attempts at this by their state legislatures. However, Florida, Arizona, and Ohio have Republican governors. There's nothing stopping them from doing it there. But the good news with that is that without these three states, Biden still sits at a projected 295 electoral votes. Fighting in Pennsylvania becomes less appealing because even if you successfully mess with the votes and replace the electors, Biden would still sit at 275 electoral votes. This becomes troublesome if Biden loses North Carolina. Now, Biden has 280 votes without North Carolina. Fighting over Pennsylvania's mail-in ballots and its electors becomes much more interesting to the Trump campaign. An action like this, without a doubt, would push America to the brink. In an attempt to maintain power, Trump would make a civil war or an armed conflict unavoidable. Now, if this happens, I'm not sure what happens. I'm an optimist and often believe in the best in people. There is a part of me that truly believes that Republicans won't push the country to a tipping point, but every time I think they can't get worse, they do. The good news, though, is that this could be avoided and probably will be avoided. It appears as though Joe Biden will win in a landslide. The larger Biden's win, the less political will there is to try to rescue Trump. The less motivation there is to try to rescue Trump. So to answer the question, what if Trump refuses to accept the election results? Well, we know he won't accept them. What happens, though, depends on whether or not the Republican Party is ready to leave Trump as the loser he is. One way or the other, we will have to listen to Trump whine as a lame duck president for 3 months. But there are brighter days ahead. If you like this video, give it a like. If you want to see more, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.
Feeling the love.